Welcome to Broad Eye, the podcast that explores knowledge gaps in ophthalmology and eye care. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Broad Eye podcast. My name is Sean Maloney, and I'm the host of today's episode. And today I'm going to be speaking with Rob Cramer, who is a guide dog mobility instructor with the CNIB in Canada. Rob, thanks for joining me on the show today.
No problem. How you doing, Sean?
I'm doing okay. So I shouldn't say I'm doing okay. I'm doing fantastic. Okay just sounds so bland. I know I'm doing well. Looking forward to the conversation today. I have a lot of questions about guide dogs in general and the people dog dynamic. So we'll dive into those in the next 20-30 minutes. So I was hoping we can start off a little bit with your journey or your background. Like what inspired you or nudged you along the path of becoming a guide dog trainer, and to maybe talk a little bit about what that career path has looked like over the last several years.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the journey actually started, I was probably around 10 years old. My mom actually has RP, so she was partially sighted growing up, and she's now totally blind. But around 10 years old, she decided to get her first guide dog. So I remember we were allowed to visit on Sundays, and we went and visited her at the guide dog training facility. And I remember meeting one of the trainers, and it sort of stuck with me. I thought, now that's a great job. I thought what he does on a day-to-day basis, the benefit he's giving to people, which I could clearly see with my mom, it sort of stuck with me. And then I sort of deviated from that path for a little bit, but I had an opportunity in my early 20s. I started deciding what to do, what I wanted to do with my life. And I was living in Australia. I'd moved there because my wife is Australian. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to revisit that dream. So I called up the local guide dog school in Queensland, and I asked them, I said, look, this is my dream. How can I achieve it? They told me, they said, look, it's a really hard career path. There's minimal positions, but if you want to do it, they suggested I take a college course on basic animal husbandry and basic care and training of animals. So I took the course, and I kept harassing the guide dog school until I got a position working in the kennels as a kennel attendant. So that entailed looking after the dogs, grooming them, doing health checks, cleaning up the kennels. But I loved every minute of it. And I was lucky enough, after about 8 months working in the kennels, an apprenticeship position became available as a guide dog trainer. So a guide dog trainer is a little bit different than my current position as a guide dog mobility instructor. As a trainer, you work exclusively with the dogs. So you train them to a standard where they're able to work safely, and then they were handed off to guide dog mobility instructors. I did that job for several years, but it was always kind of a dream to become a guide dog mobility instructor. At the time, I wasn't able to follow that path because you actually required a master's to do it in Australia at the time. So I kept working as a guide dog trainer for probably about 6 years. And then they changed the requirements, and I was able to start the apprenticeship as a guide dog mobility instructor, which involved teaching the guide dog handlers how to use the guide dogs. So I started doing that, finished off the apprenticeship in Canada, actually. So I was partway through it when I saw that CNIB was starting a guide dog program. And I thought it was quite an exciting opportunity and quite a natural fit for me, because I remember as a kid volunteering for the CNIB. So I saw it and I thought, you know what, I think that might be meant to be for me. It's very rare in the industry to get to be a part of a guide dog school in its infancy. So I made the move over in 2018, finished my guide dog mobility instructor apprenticeship, and I've been working here with CNIB guide dogs ever since.
Wow. Okay. So no, that's interesting background. It's brought up a couple of things here. So the apprenticeship program, when you're doing it in Australia and in Canada, is this like an internationally recognized accreditation?
Yes, it is. It's recognized by the International Guide Dog Federation.
Okay, fair enough. So it's pretty standardized. another thing that just came to mind when you were just talking about when you were about 10 years old. I guess I misheard or misinterpreted for a moment there, but it brought up a question. You said that when you were approximately 10 years old, your mother got her first guide dog, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so now the question that came out of that when I misheard it was, is how old, I guess, do you have to be, or is typically recommended before you can get a guide dog? Because I mean, there are children who have visual impairments as well. So I'm just curious, if there's guidelines or standards around that?
Yeah, every school is going to be different, and I would recommend to people to contact a variety of guide dog schools to see what their requirements are. Um, Generally, though, in the industry, 16 years old is sort of the most common age. But there's always exceptions for people younger who have the maturity and are able to manage the responsibility of having a guide dog, because it's a lot of work. And if you think about bringing a guide dog into high school and just dealing with the other students, trying to keep them from interfering with your dog and patting your dog when it's working, it's a lot to manage. So I've certainly met people who've had guide dogs at 14 and have done exceptionally well with them. But generally people wait a little bit longer.
Fair enough. Okay, so as a guide dog mobility instructor now, what does your life, what does your job look like? It's very vague. What's your job? I understand. So you're working more with, I guess, the combination of the dog and so the handler is the technical term for the individual who uses the guide dog, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does the mobility instructor do, or what do you do? Is it just training the handler how to interact with the dog, or what does the job involve?
So it changes from day to day. At times, I'll be more focused on training dogs. So I might have periods of time where I'm training a group of dogs for 5 months. Periodically through that time, though, I'm probably traveling to do some assessments with people who are applying for a guide dog. I may also be going out and providing follow-up services to our clients or to our handlers that have guide dogs. So I might be training dogs and mixing in a little bit of client work, or at other times when I've finished with those group of dogs or someone else has trained a dog that's ready to go out with the handler, then I'll take that dog once they're matched to one of our handlers, and I'll do a training program with either an individual handler or with a group of handlers. So generally it takes, if we do a group class, it's about 2 weeks in Ottawa, followed by approximately a week at home, teaching them how to work with the guide dog, and that involves in harness and out of harness. How to interact with the public with your guide dog, how to advocate for your access rights. So there's a lot to learn with that. At the moment, we're only doing one-on-one training programs. So we're traveling to wherever the handler lives and doing the programs from their home, just because of COVID. So it's obviously not as efficient, but we're still managing to get the dogs out there.
So it's a good segue into my next question, which was related to COVID. How else has the whole pandemic, shutting things down, the border and different things, how has that impacted your job or the CNIB's guide dog training program in general?
It's had a massive impact on the entire industry. A lot of handlers in Canada had previously gone to the States to get guide dogs. That's obviously not an option right now. So at CNIB, we've had a 375% increase in interest in applications for a guide dog. So that's huge. It's also affected our pups, because we get our puppies from a specialized service dog breeder in Australia, and we haven't been able to get the pups to Canada since the pandemic started. So one of the things we've done is actually collaborated with other guide dog schools. So one of those collaborations is actually having one of our staff members go to Australia and work with our puppies over there, but they're actually in the homes of volunteers with Vision Australia Seeing Eye Dogs. So our staff member is gonna support those puppy raisers and get those pups ready. So once flights open up, we're gonna bring those pups back so they can begin the formal part of their training. So that's really exciting. We were lucky enough that staff member's originally from Australia, so it actually worked out really well for us, and we're gonna be able to keep up our supply of dogs. We also have a couple other really exciting collaborations, which I don't think anything like this has been done previously. A couple of the guide dog schools in the United States have actually, they've got some guide dog handlers that are ready for training. They've got dogs for them, but they can't come across the border right now to train them. So CNIB is actually going to provide the instructors, the guide dog mobility instructors, to run those training programs. And then the schools from the US are going to be providing us with some pups and some older dogs that'll be ready to be trained. So it's benefiting both organizations, and it's meaning we're getting guide dogs in the hands of people who need them in Canada, which is great. So COVID's created a lot of challenges, obviously, for us, but I'm really excited by the initiative and the creativity. The guide dog schools have been, really working to come up with solutions that are outside the box. So it's definitely a challenge, and like I said, there's a 375% increase in applications. So we're doing our best at CNIB to meet that demand. We're hiring staff, and we're developing our CNIB Canine campus in Ottawa to allow for more dogs to be trained. So we're doing everything we can to meet that need, but it is huge, and it's obviously costing more as well. So we've initiated an urgent expansion campaign. So we're hoping to raise funds to cover 150 qualified guide dogs. So up to this point, we've raised enough to cover 40 dogs. So that's amazing, but we're still working to reach that goal.
Fair. Okay, so definitely interesting. A couple of things come out of this. The first question I have is, why a 375% increase in demand in such a short time? Is it just because it's a supply and demand issue, or is there a greater need now for more dogs? Just can you comment on that?
Yeah, there's more need in Canada because up until this point, a lot of guide dog handlers in Canada have gone to the States to get their guide dogs. So as soon as that was stopped, it meant people that were in need of a dog were having to rely on the schools in Canada. So it's just created a huge demand for dogs sourced in Canada and trained in Canada.
So, okay, my next question is, and maybe there's an obvious answer to this, but why Australia? Why US? Why do we not, breed dogs for to become guide dogs within Canada, or do not do it on the scale that is necessary?
Yeah, a lot of it's scale. It costs about $50,000 to train and provide for a guide dog over the course of its life. So the schools in the States are massive, and they've been operating for a very long time. So some of those schools put out about 300 dogs a year, and the schools here in Canada just aren't at that scale at this point. And the reason that we use a breeder from Australia is because as a new school, we don't have breeding lines. So that's something we are looking to start very soon. We want to get a breeding program, so we're breeding our own dogs here. But the breeder that we use in Australia, she's got proven guide dog lines and service dog lines. So these are dogs with generations behind them of proven working lines, which is a big part of it.
No, okay, that's fair. So I guess that kind of leads me into another topic here, and maybe we'll go on some tangents here. But when you're talking about having proven service guidelines or history there with certain breeders. What's the process, I guess, for matching these dogs with handler? Because I'm assuming that there's going to be, there's probably certain qualities that are absolutely necessary for the dog to have, I guess, which is why you'd have certain breeding lines. But I would think that, for example, someone who's an athlete and is out on the go all the time versus somebody who may be a little bit slower moving, who is older, I'm thinking just the pace of the dog and maybe the temperament are going to be different. And so how does that matching process work?
Yeah, it's a good question, Sean, and it's a really, really critical part of what we do, getting that match right. So the way we operate, when someone sends in an application, we look at that application that talks about their lifestyle and sort of their height, and there's some basic information there to go off. We'll also get a recommendation from their orientation and mobility instructor, letting us know that they have the required skills to orientate themselves in their environments. But once they've sort of gone through that process, we'll actually send a staff member out to do an in-home interview and assessment. So that process, it's about 3 hours, but what we're doing is really trying to get to know the person, get to know their lifestyle, like you said, get to know their walking speed. So we'll actually do a walk with them. If we can, we try and bring a dog with us on that assessment so we can actually see how they interact with the dog too. But we're really working hard in that 3 hours to capture as much about that person as we can. And some of it, like I said, is the walking speed and what type of environments they're going to be working in. They might be working in big, busy cities where there's a lot going on and a lot of noises that the dog would have to cope with. But part of it as well is finding out what they like in a dog, because a lot of the time they're going to be with the dog. It's going to be in a social environment. It's going to be in their home. So I could match a dog to someone and it could work perfectly for them and meet their needs from a mobility perspective. But if it's a dog that they don't enjoy being around in the house, that's going to affect that relationship. So I'm really trying to find the perfect dog for the person. It's a combination of an art and a science, and we really work hard to get it right. So once we've captured all that information, we do actually sit down and have meetings to decide the best dog for each person. And it can take a bit of time because getting that wrong can really be detrimental. If we get the wrong dog for someone, they come in for training, they're taking time out of their lives, they come in and let's say the speed is wrong. The dog is just not walking as fast as they want to walk. That's a team that hasn't worked out, and that person's taking time out of their life. There's an emotional investment as well. So we really, really work hard to get that match right.
No, I think that, okay, so it's going to bring me to another question here. You're making my job so easy. Because I wanted to dive into the dog being a guide versus a pet and that dynamic for people to navigate. So when matching people, you're considering that, hey, this dog can be a good guide because of whatever, if it's walking speed, a person's height, temperament, or whatever it may be. But that dog also has to be, like you said, a pet for these people, because unless you're on the go 24/7, then that dog is not always working, right? The dog has downtime as a pet as well. How do you would provide advice through a CNIB, or just I guess how do new handlers navigate that dynamic of, okay, now the dog's working and now he's she is my friend and we're playing outside together?
Yeah, they're supported with that process. We teach them how to manage home behaviors as well as working behaviors. And a lot of that is, it comes down to consistency and managing sort of what the expectations of that handler has. So some people may decide, they don't want the dog playing in one room in their house. Maybe it's got really nice floors and they don't want them scratched, and that's off limits. So we can teach them and we can support them in how to implement those those rules and guidelines for the dog. And we teach them as well, like things that the dog needs for their own enrichment, really, and their own, the dogs work hard and they do need that downtime to relax and just release some energy. So we teach things like enrichment exercises for the dogs, how you can play with your dog. And one thing I really like to do is combine play with training. So I make games that are fun for the dog, fun for the person, but they're also going to incorporate probably some obedience. So it just keeps up that relationship where, the dog is responding to the handler, you're keeping those skills sharp, but they're also having a lot of fun doing it.
I like how I try to raise my kids. It's like, well, the dynamic a little bit is there. You want the dog to be obedient when necessary, but then to also have just that playful interaction as well, right? So it's like my kids. I want them to listen when I need them to listen, but I want to be able to go outside and do things with them, and not just a boss employee type of relationship, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of transfer. There's a lot of transfer between kids and dogs, really. I can definitely see that connection.
I know a separate question here. These guide dogs typically males or females, or is it a mix?
It's a mix.
Okay. No, I was just curious because it's not something I've ever seen discussed anywhere. So I didn't know if there was any specific gender specific differences. Now, do you tend to match, or is this again a mix? If you have a male handler, or it doesn't really matter if they have a male female dog or a female handler, or is it just kind of whatever they prefer?
It doesn't really matter. We'll match males and females. We're looking more at temperament and the dog's skills. So yeah, there's not really any connection that way. The only thing we may look at is size of the dog compared to size of the person. Some people do have a preference though. Like when I go out and interview someone, they may say to me, I want a female dog or I want a male dog. So that's fine. We'll put that down on the assessment and we'll consider that when matching. But the only thing I will tell people when they say that is it may extend their waiting time. Because if I get, let's say they tell me that they will only have a female dog. So I might have a male dog that matches to them perfectly, but because it's a male, it won't be considered. So they may get pushed down and have to wait a little bit longer. It's the same with color preference. Some people might have a preference for a yellow or a black dog, which is fine and understandable, but it can extend your waiting time.
Yeah, which makes sense. The more specific your criteria, then it's the harder it is to make that match, I suppose. Okay, dog versus cane. You mentioned earlier that when you're trying to match a dog with a handler, you want to know that person's orientation skills already. So I'm assuming that a lot of the handlers will go through some sort of orientation and mobility training ahead of time. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're talking about dog versus cane, what's the difference and what's better for who? I guess it's a very open question, but it's maybe I'm opening up a can of worms here, but just if you can just comment on that in general, a dog versus a cane as a mobility vehicle, so to speak.
The first thing I'd say is I will never tell someone, that a guide dog is better than a cane. It's really down to individual preference because it's a very, very different style of mobility. When you have a cane, you really have a connection with your environment, a tactile connection that can be helpful, right? When your cane hits, let's say the end of a curb and you can feel where that curb is, you're not going to have that with the dog, so it can be quite overwhelming for first time guide dog handlers when they feel they're just moving through space without actually having contact with it, if that makes sense. A guide dog though can increase your efficiency of travel and for a lot of people, because with a cane, again, if we use an example where there's a car parked across the sidewalk, with a cane, you're gonna make contact with that car, and then you're gonna have to find out how far it extends and how to get around it safely. With a guide dog, you may not even know that that car was there. It's just going to fluidly take you around the car and then take you back to the sidewalk, which can speed things up for a lot of people. I've heard people describe it. They say that walking with a guide dog is a lot more like walking as a sighted person. And some people say that it's less strenuous mentally, that you're not having to think as much. Saying that, there's a lot more to think about with the guide dog in terms of distractions, in terms of managing their behavior. You know, a cane doesn't get distracted. A cane doesn't have to be, you don't need to find a place for them to go toilet either. So it's a different lifestyle with the dog. It's very much a 24/7 responsibility for you. You need to think about that dog's health. So it's different, and it's really an individual choice. A lot of people enjoy the confidence they get having a guide dog. A lot of people enjoy the fact that guide dogs can locate objectives for them, so they can find things like doors, stairs, an empty seat, escalators. So these are things with a cane, you can't tell your cane to find the door. So there's benefits to both, and that's why I do really like to bring a dog with me when I do an assessment for someone wanting a guide dog, because I want them to experience that difference and decide whether it's right for them. Because for some people, they may try it and then just go, okay, that's not what I thought it was, and that's okay. It's not the right mobility vehicle for everybody, but for people who like it, they generally love it. Once people are sort of hooked on guide dog mobility, it's sometimes hard to get them to go back. I know personally, my mom, when she's had gaps between guide dogs, it's been it's definitely been a challenge for her, and she just misses that guide dog mobility and the freedom that it provides for her.
I can imagine that. You're talking about how walking with a dog, you might not even know certain objects are there, and maybe you didn't really care anyways, but because that dog is really helping you navigate around your environment. It made me think about a former colleague I had when I was doing research many years ago, and she had two sons who were completely blind. And I remember, when she would go places, she'd be taking them by the hand, and they, not pulling them, but you kind of leading them everywhere they go, and they can follow very effortlessly because they trust that their mother is leading them in the right direction. So I'm wondering if there is any relationship between the desire to and the willingness to let go, so to speak, and trust in the dog. If there's a relationship between maybe the timing of when someone loses vision and that preference, or do you tend to see people who maybe lost vision younger, as they become adults, they are more willing to use a dog, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they're more just adapted to using a cane because they can get a cane at a very young age. I don't know if there's any relationship you see there, if I'm just way off in left field with this.
It's a really interesting question, and it'd be something I'd like to see data on, actually. From personal experience, it's probably a bit varied. It depends. I don't know if I could draw any connections, but it is something, you mentioned about if someone's losing their vision and trying to find the right time to get a dog. And what that made me think about was how sometimes, having some residual vision can actually make it harder to work with a guide dog for some people. It can be a benefit, but it can also be a hindrance, because having some vision allows you to potentially help the dog out a bit more and support them. You might see that there's a dog coming towards you. If you've got some central vision, you may see that there's a dog coming towards you, and you can prepare your dog to manage that distraction better. But when you have vision, you have some vision there, it can be harder to trust the dog. You know, you mentioned trust, and that's a big part of the relationship. So having a bit of vision, some people can tend to not want to follow the dog because they're following their line of travel that they think they should be going, and the dog might be trying to take them around something that's out of their field of vision. But because they've still got some vision, they're not 100% trusting the dog, which can really hinder the mobility and the safety of that guide dog team. So sometimes when there's people like that, I'll even use a blindfold in training. I actually had a gentleman I was working with last year, and he had a little bit of vision, and he was just having that moment where it was hard for him to trust the dog completely, and he kind of had his idea of where he should be going. So around the 4th day of training, I put him into a blindfold. When we finished that walk, he turned around, he's like, "Why didn't you do this day one?" It just made it that much easier for him. So, you know, and but for some people, you know, that might be very intimidating to go under blindfold. So it's not a technique that we're going to use with everyone or make people do. You know, I had a discussion with the gentleman and agreed we would try it. And in that instance, it really helped. And then once he was able to do it with the blindfold on, he saw what he needed to do and how he could use his vision to support the dog without interfering with the dog, if that makes sense.
It's kind of interesting to think, okay, being totally blind in that scenario actually makes it easier to, or at least, you know, to develop that mobility training with the dog, I guess, right? Or how having some vision could be a hindrance. It's, you know, I live that on the daily as well as many other people, where you have a little bit of residual vision, which, you know, how long will hold on, who knows? And then you try to still do things without, you know, fully embracing, like, okay, yeah, maybe I should be using voiceover on my phone at this point. It's like, well, no, if I zoom in a lot, I can read 3 letters at a time. And it's like, okay, at some point, whereas if you're totally blind, you're just like, okay, this is my reality. Let's just, you know, make the jump, right?
It can be simpler, I think. I mean, it's different, and everyone's experience is different, so I don't like to comment too much. But it can be simpler, you know. Personally, I find it probably a little bit easier to work with people who have less vision because of those reasons. But saying that, having some vision can be really helpful. It's just learning how to use the vision you have, right? And it's also thinking about, like, what's the eye condition? Is it progressive? Is it likely to change? Because that may change how you work with the dog as well.
You know, that makes a lot of sense. So the experience you've had in Canada and in Australia, everywhere in between, I'm sure that's served up a few, more than a few stories. And I'm wondering if you want to, without me queuing up anything specific, if you have any stories that you think the audience would either benefit from hearing or just simply enjoy.
Yeah, there's a couple. One that stands out to me that was just something I really enjoyed. I was working with a guide dog handler in Canada a couple of years ago now, and they were an experienced guide dog handler. So, and we had a nice dog for them. So, just flew through the training program, and we had some time left before I was supposed to fly back to Ottawa. So we decided one of her big dreams was to do the grouse grind. For anyone who's familiar, they call it Nature's Stairmaster. It's in Vancouver. It's about 3 kilometers straight up a mountain. I think it's 2,800 steps. So this was a big dream for this young lady to get up that mountain. So I thought we had the time and we had the dog. This dog was endless energy. She was just full of energy. So we actually did the grouse grind together with her guide dog. Part of that, and the way that track is, some of it's stairs, but a lot of it's like stairs made out of rocks, tree roots. It's a whole variety of surfaces, and it's quite a challenge to do. And this person was totally blind, and we thought, you know what, let's do it together. So some of that she was able to use with her guide dog, actually navigating the trail and indicating steps and avoiding any surface changes. Part of it was probably a little too dangerous to do that way, especially as they were a new guide dog team. So I did sighted guide, and we came up with a system so I could describe the steps, because they're all different sizes. Some were small, some were medium, some were rock. So we came up with a 1, 2, 3 system, because I said, look, I might be out of breath. I'm not going to be able to describe everything in detail. So we just said, like, a 1 is a little step, a 2 is medium, and a 3 is a big one you got to lift your leg up for. So I would say, Rocky 3 or, log 2. But we made it up, it's one of the things I'm most proud of in my career, because I'm really passionate about empowering people to do, to follow their dreams, and let's make it work. So this was something like we were able to do with the dog, and it's not your standard mobility, but it was a big achievement. And I think it helped that relationship between the two of them. They did that together, and if they can do that, there's nothing they can't do. And I always told people that's where I got my master class in sighted guide, because I think for me, if I can do that, everything else should be fairly straightforward. So that was it's not related to guide work entirely, but it was something, and it sort of shows the other side. A guide dog can guide you, but they're also there as your buddy, as a companion. So that was a really special one for me. And I guess another story that comes to mind is actually a gentleman I worked with who was very much not a dog person, and he told me when I interviewed him, he just said, look, I've never had dogs. I'm not really into dogs. I like cats, but I think a guide dog could really benefit my mobility. So he was interested just in the mobility, using the dog as a mobility device, but he was a little bit unsure about what that would mean living with one. And what was really great is the CNIB, actually, after I interviewed him, I went and I talked to my manager, and I said, look, like, here's a guy, I think a dog could really help him. He's got the mobility skills. However, I'm not sure how he's going to go living with a dog. So what we were actually able to do, I was approved to go and bring a dog to this gentleman and let him stay overnight. I happened to be in the area anyways. So we had a dog stay overnight just so we could get a feel, for what it's like living with a dog, cleaning up after them, feeding them, all those things, because that would have been, the stumbling block for him during class training. And I showed up the next morning. I wasn't sure the whole night. I was staying, about 2 minutes away. I said, look, call me if there's any problems, but he made it through the night, and he said, you know what, I think this is something I could do. And it was really nice, because the dog that I placed with him overnight is actually the dog that he ended up with. And he'll still tell you he's not a dog person, but I won't say the name of his dog. We've just got confidentiality, but he says, I'll use Fido. He's a Fido person now. He loves his dog. And to be honest, they're one of my best teams. I went out to watch them recently, and they've been out working about a year, and their mobility is flawless. They work incredibly together. The relationship is so nice between the two of them. So that was something I really thought was amazing, just to see the transformation, and to see now, and seeing him play with the dog and enjoy the dog, and get the benefits of the mobility as well. He went into it thinking, oh, it'll just be about the mobility, but he's come away loving. He's a Fido person now, and he loves that dog, and he's one of my best teams. So see someone go from a place where they weren't comfortable with dogs to being, one of the best teams, that I work with is something I'm really proud of, and really proud of him, and sort of a nice one for me.
Well, if you can convert someone from a cat lover to a dog lover, I mean, that's great already, right? So
he was a pretty special dog. He's a really nice dog, and we did match with that in consideration. That dog was almost more like a cat, but he had some mannerisms. but we did, like,
attitude or what? I think a lot of cats have attitude, right?
Yeah, well, a little bit of that, but he loves his attention, and he'd rub up against you. And he's just sort of understated in the home, like if I had a matched, if I'd have matched the dog that went up the grouse grind with that gentleman, it never would have worked. This was a more mature dog. Like the dog that went up the grouse grind, I couldn't believe it. She got up to the top. This was a couple of 2.5 hours, and she could have done it again. Like she was just wiggling, loving it, and just, I was exhausted. But if I had matched this gentleman with that dog, it would have went terribly, because she would have been bouncing around his apartment looking for stuff to do, throwing toys around.
Trying to find the cats.
Yeah.
Now you have to think about that too. Like if someone has animals already, if they have a cat or any other animal in the house, like can they still be matched with the guide dog, or do they have to I don't think they have to get rid of their cats. Like I don't know how that works, or if part of the training for the dogs is being in an environment with other animals.
Yeah, we do try and expose, like a big part of it is socializing the puppies when they're young and impressionable, so we try and socialize them with as many animals and as many situations as we can. At the canine campus where we train our dogs, we also have 2 kennel cats, so all the dogs that are trained there have exposure to cats. And then some of it, we can't always prepare for every situation. I was working with someone recently who had a pet rabbit, and we don't have a campus rabbit at the training center. So I had to do some work, with the dog, just making sure they're comfortable around the rabbit and making sure those interactions are safe. But again, it's something we match for. So if I've got a dog that I know has, is a bit more interested in small animals, and you can see that just from, walking past squirrels and things like that. So I wouldn't have put a dog that, I could see a heightened interest in small animals with that person. We consider those things when we're matching, and we try and prep each dog as much as we can for the individual situation once they are matched. So we try and match, between 4 and 6 weeks prior to a training program with the handler. So during those 4 to 6 weeks where I know who that dog is going to, I'm going to try and prep them for that person's routine and lifestyle. And whatever that means, whether it's, rabbits in the house, or maybe the person goes on, long trail walks. If that's the case, I'll try and work them in those sort of environments. If it's someone who works in the city a lot and is on trains regularly, I'll try and replicate that sort of lifestyle for the dog in those final weeks of training. So it's sort of customizing the dog for the person.
Yeah, I imagine households with kids and stuff too, right? I mean, some dogs. Yeah. Now, just before we wrap up this story about the 2800 stair climb, I've gone hiking before, and I'm terrible at hiking. Even when I have somebody, guiding me, like my wife will say, okay, tree route. Okay, here's a step. And then my kids will just kind of run up the trail, and I'm kind of, going slow and whatnot. So when you have somebody, with your help and with a guide dog climbing up 2800, steps of log 2 and rock 1 and those things, like that's, I mean, it's maybe a dream come true for this person, but I can just only imagine the infusion of self-confidence after that too. It's like, whoa, I just did this, and 99% of sighted people are never going to do something like that, because it'd just be too grueling and quite honestly difficult, even if you'd see, right, just the uneven terrain and whatnot. So I think that you accompanied this individual on that journey is certainly quite awesome. And I hope you volunteer to do that for every other person who wants to go climb the 2,800 steps. Or you look back and I say, well, you know what? Hey, that was a little crazy, but it was fun once. So
I would love to do it again. It's something I'm looking at getting involved in, more of the adaptive sports, and trying to use some of my skills to help with those things, because like you said, like the empowerment and the sense of achievement for that young lady was just incredible to witness, and to be there with her when she did that was amazing for me.
Great. Listen, great stories. Rob, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. It's certainly a lot of fun. Do you have anything else that you want to say before we wrap it up, or any direction you would, direction you would direct is a horrible way to say that. Any way you would direct the audience to, find out more information? Anybody who might be interested in getting a guide dog or understanding what that experience is like, anything you would suggest to them?
Yeah, there's plenty of information, and you can apply on CNIB.ca. And for anyone who's interested in supporting the program, particularly now when we do have a huge increase in demand, you can go to sponsorpuppies.ca, and through that portal you can arrange for one-time donation. There's monthly donations, which are quite a popular option. People can choose to donate a small amount every month, which and in turn you'll get some updates and contact from us. But it's very much needed right now. We don't have any government support, so all the money we have comes from donations, sponsorships, and it's critical because there's a big need for guide dogs in this country right now, and we want to be able to service as much of that need as we can.
So, and sponsorpuppies.ca is pretty much the best domain name you could possibly get for people to help with this. I mean, this is, I don't know how someone could say no if they went to sponsorpuppies.ca. So anybody who's listening to this, check out sponsorpuppies.ca. And Rob, thanks again for joining me on the show. It's certainly a pleasure, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks for having me on.
All right, take care.
All right, bye-bye.
And that concludes today's episode of the Broad Eye Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Of course, ratings and reviews are always welcome. And you can certainly share this episode with any of your colleagues or friends who might enjoy it. Thanks for listening.